So before I close, there are a few additional things that I would like to acknowledge. This is where I plan to make some connections to today's political context. So the first thing to say here is that everything that I've actually said in all the previous sections was intended to be as politically neutral as possible, because as far as I'm concerned, basic civil rights and standing up for the viability of a multiracial democracy should be a bipartisan effort. I realize, though, that today's polarization means that it won't have sounded like that to a lot of people. And for this reason, if you will indulge me, I would like to end by highlighting some connections between the emboldened racism of white nationalism, our political situation, and the threat to our democracy. Many people today are completely perplexed, understandably, about why almost half of the United States population continues to support the current president. I think I know why there is such an avowed dedication, and how that support undermines our collective reaction to the threat of white nationalism. Last year, I attended a conference for far-right evangelical Christians. That conference helped me understand how much crossover there is between white nationalist rhetoric and the values of conservative Christians. I will tell you, I went there specifically because I saw some of the same language. I wanted to understand, how do I not see this group as a white nationalist group? Where is the division between these groups? I wanted to know more. And please understand, I'm absolutely not suggesting that evangelical Christians are white nationalists. Not at all. What I am saying, though, is that they have a lot of shared interests. And the current president is key to their ability to implement their vision for the country. This conference made it clear. Evangelical Christians recognize that they are losing the demographic shift. They fear immigrants who are not Christian. They're largely anti-LGBTQ. They're aligned with an anti-feminist agenda in the sense that they'd like to preserve stereotypically traditional family structures and gender roles, as well as more conservative approaches to sexual and reproductive education. They hold tight to the Western cultural tradition, continuing to see the value in the idea of manifest destiny and the US as a Christian nation. Let me also state clearly that this may not be true of all evangelical Christians, but this was absolutely true for the group that came together as a faction of a much larger national group that does identify this way. But for all of these reasons you see, they perceive the value of minority rule to protect not only their religious freedoms, but their ability to ensure that the US remains hospitable to their views and their way of life. Voter suppression, the consolidation of power, ensuring that rural white voters' voices hold more power, it's all part of making sure that this continues. All of this matches up quite well against the white nationalist agenda, which has its foundation, the fear that white people are losing the demographic shift. They don't want immigrants to come and continue the power shift. Their anti-LGBTQ and anti-feminist narrative may be about fears of reducing the white population, but it makes them similarly invested in undermining Planned Parenthood, having control over women's reproduction, and uplifting masculinity via traditional family structures and gender roles. For all these reasons, they also perceive the value of minority rule. It's just that theirs is specifically fascist. Our current administration's autocratic leanings and the breaking of norms of our institutions are serving evangelical Christian viewpoints. Some may view this primarily through the lens of judicial nominations and the reshaping of the Supreme Court, but the result is that conservative Christians have little impetus to discourage their kids from ingesting alt-right media, where white nationalists recruit. And this means that when Congress does hold hearings to examine this issue, it's derailed by conservative voices who offer a counterclaim that it's the liberal media that's biased against them. In the midst of the confusion, what needs to be top of mind is that Twitter rants by politicians about a potential civil war align with white nationalist calls for race war. We need to be aware during this time of political and social upheaval that a large part of the population has been arming themselves. I am not trying to be inflammatory. I simply want to highlight that while being a Second Amendment advocate does not make one a white nationalist, the interests of white nationalists, militia groups, and gun rights activists overlap in significant ways. So, when a politician makes a comment about how many guns exist in red states versus blue states, again, this is aligned with white nationalist hopes of sowing dissension in order to bring about a war that they hope will end with their imagined white ethnostate. I do want to briefly make some connections to what is happening right now. That white nationalists have been trying to take advantage of this last week or so by offering both misinformation online as well as actively going out and creating destruction. Additionally, I want to uplift this, maybe it's a year old, Reveal News set of articles. Each of these titles is a separate article that highlights how, and the series is called To Protect and to Slur, and it's a lot of research that went in to show how many police officers have ties to militia groups and or support white nationalist ideology, et cetera, et cetera. I would highly suggest you taking a look at these. Additionally, what's happening right now, this last week, we've been seeing that there are certain officers who are out actually in active movement against protesters who are visibly displaying patches, hand signals, and or other symbology that links them to extremist militia groups who also have a lot of crossover with white nationalism. And we're doing this all within a time period where there are unmarked federal agents that had been deployed. And so some of these folks have the kind of military gear and equipment that they could actually portray themselves as being such officers at some point if this were to expand. So we need to be extremely cautious. Finally, something to watch out for as we go forward. The director of the FBI recently named white supremacist extremism as a priority threat. We should watch to make sure he keeps his job. Up until this week, I was also warning that we should watch out for the various inspectors general who have acted independently. In the last month, 4 of them who hold key oversight positions have been fired. Especially now, we need to pay attention when people who stand up for the democratic rule of law get pushed out. This little book on tyranny by Timothy, there we go. This little book on tyranny by Timothy Snyder is an important resource. It helps us understand how our institutions can be undermined, particularly if and when a large percentage of the population see those in power as serving their interests. So what I am saying here at the end of it all is that these times require us to do more than simply care for each other and to vote in November. We each have to do more. Each of us is obligated to take a stand in a more overt way. One of the messages from On Tyranny that hit me hardest is that our institutions will not save us. We are facing multiple crises simultaneously, and we will need a comprehensive view of what we face if we're going to take this kind of action needed to get through it together as a united country,